Today, we are talking about a name that's basically synonymous with the American Mafia, Carlo Gambino. But what's so fascinating is that his story isn't about being the loudest or the most violent guy in the room. No, it's a story about quiet, cunning, and calculated power. And that really gets us to the heart of the puzzle, doesn't it? How on earth did the guy they called the boss of all bosses, the absolute head of a massive criminal empire, run the show for half a century and only spend less than 2 years in a jail cell? It seems impossible, so let's get into it. Gambino's whole story starts like so many others, with a long trip from the old world to the new. But his journey didn't start with a bang. It started in the shadows. So get this. He's just 19 years old when he sneaks into the United States as a stowaway on a ship. He lands in New York, hooks up with his cousins, the Castellanos, and starts working for their trucking company. But, trucking wasn't his endgame. It didn't take long for him to find his way into one of the biggest crews in the city, Joe Masseria's crime family. Now, you gotta understand, the New York that Gambino stepped into was basically a powder keg waiting to explode. A huge, bloody war was about to kick off that would totally change the American Mafia forever. And Gambino, he had a front row seat to watch and learn from all the massive mistakes the old-timers were making. The guys at the center of all this were known as the Mustache Petes. I mean, the name says it all, right? These were the old-school Sicilian bosses. They were rigid, they only trusted other Sicilians, and their whole world revolved around these old-world ideas of honor and violent respect. Yeah, that whole way of thinking, it was about to become a major liability. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you've got Gambino's boss, Joe Masseria. He is the old world, all about tradition, mistrust, and solving problems with a gun in the street. But on the other side, you've got the new generation, led by the absolute genius Charles Lucky Luciano. Luciano saw the future, and it wasn't about where you were from. It was about business, about efficiency, and about making money with anyone who could help you do it. And then, boom, 1931, the future arrived, and it was brutal. Luciano sets up his own boss, Masseria, to be killed. The guy who won the war, Salvatore Maranzano, makes himself boss of all bosses. Well, that lasted about 5 months before Luciano had him killed too. And with the old guard wiped out, Luciano created the Commission, basically a board of directors for the mob, designed to stop these bloody wars from ever happening again. And while all this insanity is going on, where's Carlo Gambino? He's watching, he's learning, and he's waiting. See, his path to the top wasn't a quick power grab. It was a 26-year-long game of chess. And what's wild is when you look at the timeline. After the war, he lands in the new Mangano family. He does his one and only prison stint in 37 for tax evasion. And then, nothing. For 20 years, he's just a captain, flying under the radar, making his money, not making waves. He doesn't make his next big move until 1951, when the infamous hothead Albert Anastasia takes over and makes Gambino his underboss. And that brings us to the day everything changed. October 25th, 1957. A barber shop at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. Gambino's boss, the Mad Hatter Albert Anastasia, is sitting back in the chair for a shave. Here's the brilliant part. Gambino didn't pull the trigger. He used somebody else's ambition as his weapon. Another boss, Vito Genovese, was desperate to be number one, and Anastasia was in his way. So Genovese comes to Gambino with a plan. Gambino quietly gives his blessing, Anastasia is hit, and Genovese thinks he's the new king. But the real winner was Gambino, who stepped right in and took over Anastasia's powerful family, which from that moment on was known as the Gambino family. So Genovese finally has the crown he always wanted. But what he didn't realize was that Gambino was already 2 steps ahead. The new boss of all bosses was about to get a masterclass in why you should fear the quiet partner, not the loud rival. First, Genovese throws this huge mob summit up in Appalachian, New York to show everyone he's the new boss, and the cops raided. It's a total disaster. But the final nail in the coffin? That was pure Gambino genius. He and Luciano allegedly pay off a drug dealer $100,000 to set Genovese up in a drug bust. No guns, no violence, just a quiet setup. Vito Genovese gets 15 years in federal prison. And just like that, Carlo Gambino, the quiet stowaway from Sicily, is the most powerful mob boss in America. And that's when the Gambino era really began. For the next 20 years, he was the undisputed king. He ruled with absolute power, not by making headlines and scaring people, but through smarts, influence, and building an empire that was bigger than anything anyone had seen before. I mean, just stop and think about that. Over 50 years in a business where the retirement plan is usually 6 feet under, he navigated a world of violence and betrayal for his entire adult life. And after all that time, after all those decades at the very top, this is what the law could get him on: 22 months. It's just an incredible number. It tells you everything you need to know about how this guy operated. So what was his secret? Well, this gives you a pretty good idea. He built power through smart alliances, like marrying his son into another crime family to get control of JFK Airport. He had amazing intelligence. He found out another boss, Joseph Bonanno, was plotting to kill him and got him kicked off the commission. He took out rivals quietly, and maybe most important of all, he kept a low profile. He hated the spotlight that got so many other bosses taken down. But hey, even the greatest kings have to name a successor. And Gambino's final decision turned out to be the one that would tear his carefully built empire apart from the inside. See, unlike nearly every other major boss from his time, Carlo Gambino didn't go out in a hail of bullets. He didn't die in a prison cell. He died of a heart attack, at home, in his own bed. It was the quiet, peaceful end he had spent his entire life planning for. But before he passed, he had to pick the next boss. And he believed the future wasn't in street rackets anymore. The real money, the real power, was in sophisticated, white-collar crime. He wanted to take the family legit, or as legit as a crime family can get. And to make that happen, he did the unthinkable. He skipped over his underboss, Aniello Della Croce, a tough, old-school street guy that everyone respected and expected to take over. Instead, Gambino picked his own brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, who was more of a businessman. In that one moment, he split his family right down the middle. The blue-collar street guys loyal to Della Croce and the white-collar faction loyal to Castellano. It was a recipe for disaster. And that leaves us with one last big question. By making the Mafia smarter, quieter, and more like a corporation, by proving that the most powerful gangster is the one you never even hear about, did Carlo Gambino actually create a form of organized crime that was way more dangerous and much, much harder to ever get rid of? Something to think about.